Hi, I'm Bill Linn. I'm the Vice President of Heritage Arsenal, and we were commissioned by the Family Care Center to create an exhibit in tribute to the 1st Cavalry Division in Vietnam. And with that guidance, what you see behind me is the exhibit that we've now unveiled. So let me go through what we were able to put together. So when you think about the 1st Cavalry Division, why was it significant? What was significant about that division? Well, it was the longest deployed division in the Vietnam War, 1965 to 1972. Fought some of the most famous battles and, in fact, had suffered the most casualties of any Army division in the entire war. So this air mobile concept started at Fort Benning in 1963 and 64 with the 11th Air Assault Division test. And what they were trying to prove was that use of helicopters to bring ground troops to key locations in mass was going to create an incredible advantage in modern warfare. And they were successful in doing that. Well, in 1965, the 1st Cavalry Division had been permanently assigned in Korea. Were now coming home to the States. So what they did is they took the 11th Air Division, reflagged it the 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile. 27 days later, the President of the United States gave them orders to Vietnam. So they are the first division to find themselves on the ground. And once they arrived in August of 1965, very soon thereafter, after they sorted themselves out with almost 16,000 soldiers, 400 to 500 helicopters, they had been issued the first issue of the M16 assault rifle. They had been issued the first subdued insignia ever used. They go in November 14th and 15th of 1965 into LZ X-ray in the Ia Drang Valley. And what I'd love to do is cut to Colonel Herren, John D. Herren, the B Company commander on LZ X-ray, 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry Division, to speak about his experience.
Veterans and family members, I feel honored to represent the 1st Cavalry Division, the first team, in the dedication of this exhibit, recognizing the historic 14 to 17 November 1965 Ia Drang Battle in the Central Highlands of South Vietnam. And I'd like to thank Lieutenant Colonel Bill Linn for putting on the exhibit, for Dr. Chuck Weber for asking for this 1st CAV exhibit in the center, and Carlos Urias of the center, who I coordinate with. The book We Were Soldiers Once and Young was written by my battalion commander, Hal Moore, and Joe Galloway, a reporter who was there for most of the battle. It aptly describes the details of the battle and portrays the action in the movie, We Were Soldiers. I thought the movie was 70% authentic. I know one of the sergeants said if Colonel Moore, who was played by Mel Gibson, was doing all that fighting back at the command center, what were we doing on the front lines? My role in the battle was as the B Company commander. I had commanded that company for a year and a half and trained it in the new air assault concept, which was a concept that led to the designation of the 1st Cavalry Division as an air mobile division. I knew the company well, the men. I had outstanding NCOs, I had good soldiers, and the only ones I didn't know that well were 3 new lieutenants who had come in just before we deployed to Vietnam. So my company landed on LZ X-ray on 14 November. I was the lead company of the 1st to 7th Battalion. And we landed in the foothills of the Chupong Mountain. My mission was to secure the landing zone. However, when we captured a North Vietnamese soldier, who I will call NVAs, we learned that there were a lot of enemy in the foothills there that wanted to kill Americans. So Colonel Moore immediately changed my mission to one of moving up towards the mountain. He did that because he knew that if the NVAs were going to attack the LZ, he needed to keep them away while we brought in the rest of the battalion. That was a difficult thing to do in a short time, because you only could get 8 helicopters in there at one time, which was only part of my company. The other 8 helicopters were hovering above, and they came in, so you really got most of my company in one lift, but then they had to go back and get the rest of the battalion. And that took time. So we moved out towards those foothills of the mountain, and we accomplished our mission. The 1st platoon made contact with a large group, and they got in a firefight and got basically pinned down. And my 2nd platoon, which was led by an aggressive young lieutenant, moved his platoon out after about 4 or 5 NVAs were in the woods, and unfortunately broke contact with the rest of the company. At that time, he got into a very fierce fight, hand to hand, and I told him to grab a piece of terrain and defend if he could. He did that with the help of support from the rest of the soldiers and a machine gun crew, which died supporting that movement to the defensive position. However, soon after he was killed, the platoon sergeant was killed, and if it wasn't for a sergeant by the name of Ernie Savage, who crawled over and got the radio and called my artillery forward observer and me, and started getting in artillery fire, we would have lost that platoon. The sergeant called in fire. He designated different barrages all around the platoon, and really basically kept that platoon alive the rest of the day and throughout the night. When I learned that the 2nd platoon had been cut off, I was very concerned. And so my 3rd platoon, which was in reserve, was over on the other side of the LZ and had moved over to be in on the movement towards the foothills. So I knew it was over there, and I was going to go over there, but I stopped momentarily to make better contact with the battalion and keep contact with that 2nd platoon. And that delay, plus some other reasons, kept me from getting to the company in time to actually get involved in a move by the 3rd platoon, 1 platoon from A company, and some of B and some of the 1st platoon to go get the platoon, because that's what I ordered them to do. My XO led that, and they didn't get very far. The NVA had already gotten in good positions, and firepower was too much. So they backed off. And I got there about the time they had returned to the creek bed, and we were taking a pretty good machine gun fire from an anthill about 75 yards away. At that time, I witnessed a young lieutenant from the A Company platoon charge out to the anthill, flip a grenade over it, then go around, kill all 3 North Vietnamese, one being a big guy who looked like a Chinese, and then he was shot through the neck, and we brought him back. Meanwhile, the rest of the LZ was under a lot of fire, and companies were still coming in. It took most of the rest of that afternoon to get everybody in, and then the fighting died down because we had artillery and gunships and so on providing cover. So at that time, Colonel Moore wanted me and the A Company commander to go get the 2nd platoon and to meet him to go do that. So A Company and I both went out. A Company was the closest to the mountain, and I was on his right. He didn't get very far before he started taking casualties. And it was getting dark. I took a few, but I was not under the fire that he was. So we had to back off. But we did keep that platoon alive, and actually there were no more soldiers killed at that platoon, that second platoon, the rest of after that initial action. So we settled down for the night. There were a few probes, and the next morning Colonel Moore wanted Colonel Nadal, the A Company commander, and me to meet with him and plan to go get the second platoon, but we never got to do that because our C Company was attacked by a large enemy force that had crawled up during the early morning hours and gotten so close to the C Company that they couldn't bring artillery fire in. So their company commander was wounded, the executive was wounded, and we almost got overrun. That's about the time that Colonel Moore called a Mayday. A Mayday means that there's an American unit about to be overrun, and all available aircraft were to come to our support, and they did. And through the air power, they were dropping napalm, bombing, and so on, and fighting that ensued. We got the North Vietnamese to retreat and quit the battlefield. So that was the end of that morning, early afternoon. And later on, about mid-afternoon or a little before that, another battalion came in by foot. And Colonel Moore ordered them to give me security so I could get the second platoon, which I did. I brought them back. We had 8 killed, 16 wounded out of 31 men. A terrible loss for that platoon, and it affected me deeply. Following that, we again settled down for the night, and the next morning we had been reinforced by elements of two companies of the 2nd and 7th, the first night and the second night, and so they were those elements and part of our units on that southeastern corner of the LZ were well dug in. They had their fires trained, they had their flip wire, their wires out and everything else, and trip wires. And so when the enemy attacked, which was sort of a dumb thing to do at the same place, they beat them back and killed a lot of them, and we had almost no casualties at all. They also brought in a lot of artillery to help out. So that basically ended the fighting at LZ X-ray, and we were evacuated, and we went back to a base camp later on that day. I'd like to switch now to talking about one of my medics who had severe PTSD. He had crawled around the platoon delivering water and ammunition from the wounded to other men and bandaging the wounds, and some of my soldiers were pretty badly wounded, and I think he saved them. But anyway, he was discharged from the Army. He got the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions with that platoon, but his wife died of cancer. And he couldn't shake PTSD. He went to the VA, but I don't think the VA thought that that was a serious disease, and they treated him as they could. He worked with them for a while, but then he started drinking, and he became a hermit. And he called me a lot. He said he was sleeping on the floor and so on. And anyway, and he died, which was really a tragic ending to his life. And he had been a heroic soldier. I say that because I think this center is innovative and so good to fill a need that veterans have for mental health care, including PTSD, TBI, and so on. The VA does a much better job than they did in Vietnam because it is considered now a serious disease. But the capabilities this center offers are really quite something. And I take my hat off to Chuck Weber for putting this all together. And I think you're supposed to exam. I understand you may expand to other military communities throughout the country. That would be great. So that's the end of my talk. Best of luck to you. Stay safe. Wash your hands. Wear your mask. Goodbye.
So what we have in here are some artifacts that are attributed to then Captain John D. Herren, who commanded B Company of 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment, 1st Cavalry Division on LZ X-ray. Now, these are indicative of items that would have been attributed to many 7th Cavalry and 1st Cavalry Division troopers on the ground. But we just happen to be fortunate enough to be able to acquire some of Colonel Retired Herren's items, and let me take you through those. So this is the actual copy of the certificate that he would have received, awarding him the Silver Star, the 3rd highest award for valor that the United States can give. What's interesting about the Silver Stars that they were giving, these were actually struck during the Second World War, and there were still stockpiles of these particular versions of the Silver Star even in 1965. And so actually Colonel Herren received a World War II vintage Silver Star for his actions in Vietnam. You see the orders that actually give a more of a description of his actions on the ground that day. You see Colonel Herren to the left of General Knowles. General Knowles was commanding the forward command post of the 1st Division, 1st Cavalry Division in Vietnam, and actually came out to visit the day before Colonel Herren and his troopers went into LZ X-ray in the Ia Drang Valley. You also see one of these award folders where all the awards that were given in Vietnam, they would have been slipped into a folder, a presentation folder just like this, and this is an original one. What we have that's absolutely fabulous is this example of a 1st pattern jungle top, the first jungle uniform issued to the U.S. Army, and this one happened to be issued to none other than Captain John D. Herren in 1965. What is indicative of the first pattern are these exposed buttons. There's little adjuster tabs at the waist and the epaulets. And what's really great about this is he actually went to a local tailor shop and had all of the insignia on it handmade on a sewing machine. And so this is just straight out of the battlefield. And what's interesting is the center picture is future Lieutenant General Hal Moore, then Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, commanding the 1st Battalion, and Captain Herren's immediate boss. You can see that he's wearing the exact same uniform in the award ceremony for the Ia Drang Valley, and you can see his Distinguished Service Cross pinned to his uniform. Then Lieutenant Colonel Moore received the Distinguished Service Cross, the 2nd highest award for valor. There were actually 3 Medals of Honor eventually awarded for actions at LZ X-ray that day in 1965. What we also have as a resource is a book co-written by Hal Moore and Joe Galloway called We Were Soldiers Once and Young. You may recognize this. Eventually became the Mel Gibson, Sam Elliott movie, We Were Soldiers, and very, very popular. But this is the book that started it all, and it's an absolute, the absolute quintessential history of the actions at LZ X-ray. What is interesting about Hal Moore, highly decorated, goes on to become a 3-star general. What's interesting about Joe Galloway, never served in the military, was an actual reporter on the ground who took the opportunity to infiltrate onto LZ X-ray with the troopers of the 7th CAV, and actually becomes the first American ever awarded the Bronze Star for Valor as a civilian. So quite interesting. We also have below, though there's no attributional history or provenance associated, we have a classic captured North Vietnamese flag, which is definitely was on the battlefield, grungy, faded, and it really rounds out this exhibit that we were pleased to present here in conjunction with the grand opening.